ISO 19650 has been an anticipated standard in the BIM community. To better understand its significance, I spoke with Paul Shillcock, Managing Director of Operam. Paul was the author of 19650 Part 2, and we turned to his expertise to get advice on how to get the best from the standard and which parts of a team need to be involved. I started by asking Paul why 19650 is so important for the construction industry.
There's a number of reasons why it's important for the industry as a whole. I think the fact that it's now a global standard is important. It means that we've got a level playing field across industry, across all regions. And it means that from a client perspective, whichever teams that they engage to deliver their assets or to maintain or to operate their assets, they know that they're going to be working in a consistent way. And that's the benefit of it being an international standard. But in a broader sense, the processes within ISO 19650 in terms of the series, they're there to minimize the wasteful activities that we see on a number of projects, and therefore increasing predictability around cost and around time. There was always a bit of a perception that this was always the benefit to the client, and yes, there are benefits to the client in terms of getting the information that they need when they need it in order to operate and maintain their assets. But also, I think increasingly now we're starting to see the benefits and the business value for the supply chain as well, and mainly from managing their own risk in what is quite a sort of, as an industry, we're working on very thin profit margins, and it's about protecting that profit margin and by eliminating a lot of the wasteful activities and making sure that there's proper planning in place to ensure that everything's done right first time.
So my next question was actually going to be who benefits? Is it the clients, the contractors? And you've explained there that really it's the whole value chain. In that case, is it easy to implement?
As a standard, I think the short answer is yes. Okay. As a process, there are 40 activities, and like any process, they're just a series of interrelated activities that convert inputs to outputs to achieve an end result. And the end result in this case is an accurate representation of what was being designed or what's being constructed in terms of the physical asset. I think that the biggest barrier is around the culture and the mindset and the behaviours that we have within the industry, because it does, by implementing the process and undertaking those activities, it does require a higher level of collaboration between all stakeholders on the project, including the client, including the tier ones, and all the way through that supply chain. And quite often we see, the people side is one thing, but there's a lot of work being done from a commercial perspective, so that there's the right commercial environment to facilitate that collaboration, and equally from a technology point of view as well, to ensure that the enabled technologies are there to support and foster collaboration, not to prevent it. So yes, it should be quite easy to, I believe it's common sense, and it's not actually something hugely new. The activities in there, as you'll see, are something that we've always done, or at least we know we should be doing. So it's not rocket science by any means, but there are a few challenges along the way, and I think the most important thing to remember that it is a team sport. You alone as an organisation or as a team cannot implement the process successfully. All project stakeholders need to be bought in and to be demonstrating the right behaviours.
I think actually that's a very interesting point where you said that it's like a team sport, because when I talk to people in the industry, I do find I find BIM is quite a divisive subject actually when I talk to people in the industry. But one of the things I also find is that you have the advocates who are saying, yes, we can make it work, we can do it well, but if we can't get our subcontractors, for instance, to fully buy in, then there's a weak link in that chain. And it sounds like what you're saying is that is something that has to be tackled. You have to get buy-in from all parts of that process.
Yeah, to achieve the ultimate outcome, there are benefits. There was a term coined a number of years ago called Lonely BIM, which is where you're just doing it on your own, in terms of your own particular team. So there's benefits just to that, but the benefits are exponential if all project stakeholders are involved, not just through the delivery phase, but throughout the life of the asset. So that means not just getting the construction client on board, it means getting the operational teams on board, getting the maintenance teams, getting the asset management teams. So start with the end in mind, getting their requirements for information up front. So, you know, there's a huge, and that needs to be passed down throughout the chain, because ultimately it's those suppliers further down the chain that are actually going to be producing that information. Okay, so it's important that all of these stakeholders are on board and are brought in early, where there's the greatest chance of influencing that outcome and understanding the requirements for information. You know, and that's just generally something we don't do and we're not very good at, and that's what needs to sort of change.
And you said that it's good for cost and time sequencing. I guess that means that by using this standard, you're going to start seeing more accurate, well, things running better to budget, running on time. You know, the planning side of a build becomes easier to do maybe, but also more accurate in its intentions.
Yeah, it's more about the predictability of cost and time rather than the accuracy. The research suggests that, you know, as a client, you've got roughly about a 50-50 chance of getting your asset delivered on time and on budget. Okay, and a lot of the metrics that are shown is, you know, that typically less than 50% of projects are either delivered to budget or better, or on schedule to better. And so a lot of that, the root cause of that is a lot of the wasteful activities, the lack of planning, lack of communication, lack of collaboration, all of these sort of things. So what, you know, I'm not suggesting that it's the silver bullet, but by following the process, what it enables you to do is to increase the predictability around that cost, around the delivery, because you're basing your decisions on accurate and up-to-date information. And that really is around where the cost predictability, the cost and time predictability comes from, by following that process. Obviously, in terms of the accuracy, a lot of that depends on the quality of the information that you put in terms of, you know, how accurate your quantities, your costs, and your schedulings are going to be. But by following the process, there's a better chance that that information is going to be more accurate. But a lot of that, in terms of the way that how the process helps that, is by understanding the requirements for information, and also understanding that what we call the level of information need now, which is a new term within ISO 19650. So that's the level of detail graphically in terms of how the asset needs to be represented, but also non-graphically in terms of the asset data that you need, and the accuracy of that data. So if you get all that right and defined up front, then there's a better chance that you're going to get the information that you need when you need it, to be able to make those more informed decisions.
In that case, do you have a few simple steps that you would advise people to take to make sure that they have the right things in place to successfully use this?
Well, it depends on who you are. I think within particularly in part 2, which is the current, which has been was published last year. Part 3, in terms of the operational phase, will be published imminently, hopefully. But in part 2, of the 40 activities, it's quite clear which party is responsible for those activities. So we've introduced these new terms. There's the appointing party, which is the client or the owner, and the appointed parties, which effectively are the suppliers within the supply chain. One of which is nominated as the lead appointed party, which is effectively the tier 1, or the appointed party who has an appointment with the appointing party. So all makes sense. So I guess for a first step is to look at those activities and to see which of those, depending on what your role is on the project, which of those activities that you are responsible for. So that would be my starting point. but recognizing that we are in a transition. So, you know, not all of the clients or owners have the capability or capacity to undertake their responsibilities in terms of the process. So it may also be a case of learning about what those other activities are, and potentially where you can support those other stakeholders within the project